Hello and welcome everyone. We're just going to give it a minute for everyone to be able to add it into the session. You're here with the Transferring to an International University, a Guide for Counsellors. In one brief second, me and my colleagues will introduce who we are. The first thing I want to remind you is please feel free to pop any questions into the Q&A or into the chat. We have a lot to get through in about 20 minutes, so we'll probably kind of speed through the presentation and then leave time at the end to go through any questions. I can see a large group of us have joined now, so I'm going to start. So firstly, just to introduce myself, I'm Tara, the Senior International Officer from London Metropolitan University. I support students from the US and Canada in transitioning. You can hear the accent, I am from London, but I'm based in BC, Canada.
Wonderful. My name's Atheena. I'm representing the American College of Greece today. I'm regional representative based out of New Jersey. We're really excited to have you all join today.
Hi everyone, my name is Tessa Rendina. I'm an admissions officer with the University College Dublin. I'm based in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Mostly travel to the Mid-Atlantic, but we work with students from both Canada and the US.
And so a little bit about what today is about. I'm sure many of you have already joined this with the understanding of what it's going to be about, but just as a small reminder, this is for everyone who's going to be working with students who are intent to go abroad. They might already be abroad, but it's going between institutions. So that'd be coming from American institutions and going to come to one of us, one of the AIRR-NA members, or between AIRR-NA members. That could also be possible. Sometimes it's not always the best fit. So the key considerations are going to be covered: motivations for going internationally, whether they be academic, financial, cultural. We're going to go over to the regional spotlights, right? So we have 3 of us from 3 different areas, and we'll speak about that a little bit. And then we'll also leave some room for questions and answers, and you can also put them in the Q&A as we go along. Welcome.
Great. The first thing to talk about is why someone might even transfer internationally. The first thing would be around academic fit, and this is really going to be personal as to what suits the students. For example, in one of our countries, for example, in Ireland or the UK, there might be slightly more focus towards subject specificness. Whereas, for example, when you're studying at American university abroad, it might be that you want that academic style of the US, but you want that lifestyle of living abroad. Key things I would be telling students to understand is things like length of study, style of study, also like style of education, and that might be institution based, whether they're more research focused or practical focused. The second will be the global exposure, both in terms of like your educational experience, but also just in terms of your work experience. You might even get the chance to work abroad, and also to have that global experience to get jobs when you are either returning to the US or Canada, or maybe going further afield. In my case, I was an international student in Australia, and since then I've lived in 4 countries. It really brought up that confidence. Affordability is a massive one, particularly compared from the US. Many of our institutions will be shorter in duration, which could save you time in both tuition and cost. Their tuition may be cheaper, but also cost of living in the area may be cheaper as well. My biggest recommendation when it comes to finances is to have students figure out the entire cost of all their study and not forget things like opportunity cost. So that would be things like, will you have to do an extra year of study and so you can't earn more money? It would be things like, what is the cost of living? But then you have to factor in things about studying internationally, around visas and travel as well. The final one is that life experience, and this is the one I think most of us hear the most about from our students, is that personal growth. It is a big thing to move abroad, particularly while still studying and transferring, which can have its own quirks, which we'll go through, but it really does build you, whether it's just learning how to, navigate, for example, in Greece in a different language, whether it's learning just how to get accommodation in another city. That personal growth really does happen when you're studying abroad.
I see there's a hand. I'm just going to ask if you could please put your question either in the Q&A or wait until the end. Just for the sake of time, we're going to try to go through all of the information and then go through questions at the end. Thank you. So thinking about some of the positives of moving abroad, now moving on a little bit more to some of the challenges that students might face, or just some of the differences and changes that they should consider. We're going to start kind of with this entry timing section. So thinking about, okay, when to apply, especially as a transfer student. we know sometimes too, students might not realize that they want to transfer until the summer. And then we're kind of speed running everything that they need to do within the summer, which, in the Republic of Ireland, our immigration visa process is on the back end. They do a lot of it after they arrive. So, it's something we can definitely squeeze in, but I would say the earliest that they have that inkling that they want to transfer, the better of just getting on it, just seeing what those differences are. Even thinking about those things of like, if they're looking at a Southern Hemisphere school, which we do have quite a few schools in AIRR-NA that are in the Southern Hemisphere, when that start is, because they're going to be reversed for their summer and winters. So just something to keep in mind for those start dates. Even too with the European calendar, I know at least in Ireland, might be similar in UK as well. We start the second week of September. So not too much later, but a little bit different than the US timeline. Even like picking classes and everything, paying first tuition is a little bit later. And we see some stress from US Canadian students who might be more used to an earlier timeline. Just knowing in overall, it tends to be a little bit later of a process, or at least closer to the start of programs. I would say for academic fit, Tara kind of touched on this a little bit as well, thinking about what school is going to be right for them based on the programs available, especially in thinking about like what types of classes might transfer over. If we have a student who is coming over, for example, from a community college, maybe 1 year or 2 years, if they have mostly general education credits at a school like University College Dublin, we don't require general education credits. So it really depends on the program they're going into. So if they have classes more specific to the program that they're entering into at UCD, a lot more of those classes might be taken. Where if it's mostly gen ed classes, then that was a great opportunity for them to figure out what major they want to go into and specialize into, and then go into that course, especially some accelerated courses. But I would say that a lot of those gen eds won't be taken into account. So that's definitely something for academic fit that they want to look into ahead of time. In terms of visa planning as well, of course, this is going to vary country by country. So as I mentioned, Republic of Ireland is mostly on the back end. I've actually done the student visa process for both South Africa and the UK. I actually attended Queen's University of Belfast in Northern Ireland, technically United Kingdom. So I did do that process myself. I remember going into an office in DC in person to do that visa process. When I attended the University of Cape Town for a semester in my undergrad at a US school, I remember going into the South Africa Embassy in DC as well, also following that checklist, making sure I had everything I needed before going into that meeting. So definitely some things that they want to look at ahead of time to make sure that they're doing everything by the time they need to, they have all the documents they need, and following those procedures. In terms of funding, Tara also mentioned kind of looking at those not only opportunity costs, but also those indirect costs. I'm going to link the Nubio.com. I typically recommend this for students. They have a cost comparison webpage for students looking at the city that they currently are attending university in to a city at one of the AIRR-NA schools, such as Dublin, for example. So they can see kind of estimates of the housing, the meals, especially because a lot of international schools don't do meal plans. So you do want to get an idea of how much you're going to be spending at the cafes around campus, at Aldi or Tesco in Dublin as well. So I definitely recommend nubio.com for kind of checking out those cost of living estimates as well. I'm also going to link another one, just a little bit more about global funding opportunities. Many of our universities do take US federal loans as well. So again, something also to look into. The last bit of this is the cultural shift. This is huge. It took me a full semester studying abroad at the University of Cape Town and then maybe my first semester at Queen's to really wrap my head around the grade differences. So I would say like some of the biggest things to consider is that the mindset about grades at university around the world outside of the US tends to shift a little bit more towards you are starting at 0 and building up to 100. Where in the US, it tends to be this main thought process of you're starting at 100 and you're kind of maybe docking points for something you've done wrong or that kind of thing. When it comes to like maybe essay writing, for example, 60 to a 69 in general tends to be around like a B range. It can vary course by course or school by school. A 70 to a 79 tends to be that A- range and so on. So that is something that you want to look at the school and consider before starting, just so that student doesn't receive their first grade back and panic. I would say another big difference I noticed is that a lot of maybe exams, for example, are taken in big test halls where you could be taking an exam, or your student could be taking an exam with students from other classes who are taking different exams as well. That's something that was a big change, I would say, from maybe a lot of US or Canadian universities and colleges. So just something to keep in mind. We do, along with many other AIRR-NA schools, offer academic accommodations as well. I would say that they might not have as many checkpoints, as many grades as they do at some US schools before they get to that midterm or that final. To see that, oh, maybe I am struggling in this course a little bit. Maybe I do need to use these supports. So I would say the biggest thing for that cultural shift is being a self-advocate and being open to those changes.
So transferring can be very institution dependent and then also country dependent. So we're going to give spotlights of each of our institutions to try and help you understand our countries. I would say because the UK is so subject specific, we don't do any general educations and you apply directly to the course. Transferring can be quite difficult. I get often asked about like credit transfers, which isn't as common in the UK. You tend to be allowed to have what we call advanced entry. So in our case, for example, London Met would look at, do you have a 2-year associate's degree from a community college or 2 years studying at a university? We would look at that to see if it matches our year one studies, which allows you to advance entry into year two. Because of that, students really need to have a lot of subjects in their particular subject area to allow them to skip that first year. So one thing, if you are advising students to transfer to the UK, particularly looking to do skipping years, then you want to make sure that they're doing what they would call major subjects as early as possible, because we're not looking at their gen ed. The other thing I would say is looking at levels. So within the UK, year one, or what we call year one of our 3-year undergraduate courses, remember our courses tend to be shorter, excluding Scotland, we see that it's called year one or formerly level 4. You have to study 2 years at universities for that equivalent. So it can't be that you've completed 1 year of American university and can skip 1 year. Another way to explain it, we actually start kindergarten younger in the UK. So we're looking at kind of amounts that you're studying. A lot of the time you'll follow these 2+2 transfers, so doing 2 years and transferring into their second year. We could potentially look at using your year one credit as a way to enter into our year one. That would still allow you for 1 year of university in the US and 3 years in the UK. Key things I want to point out around financial considerations. So many UK universities do accept FAFSA or US federal aid. I like to point out kind of cash flow. You only receive those funds a few weeks after you've arrived in the UK, but there are upfront costs, which I really like to advise students about, particularly visa costs, international health surcharge fees. So this is what our NHS is, flights, and that first-ish month of living in the UK. So it's another thing I would advise. In terms of visa process, in terms of the UK, students need to receive a CAS by meeting their academic, financial, and making sure they have a passport that's in date. If students don't have a passport yet or it's out of date, advising them to get this. And that's when they can go on to apply for their visa. Main things I would tell in advising is to let them understand cash flow and making sure they have enough coursework in their major subject.
So similarly, at UCD, I would say most of the time we're not seeing students take off an entire year from their program, especially if they're coming in with 1 to 2 years, maybe at a community college, obtaining their associates. So it just depends on, again, the types of credits they have in the classes and what program they're going into and the relevancy between those. So I'm going to start at the bottom in the blue box there. For UCD specifically, we actually have our transfer students apply to stage 1 as if they're applying from high school. If they're accepted to their program, and again, it would be major specific that they apply to. They are accepted into their program and they decide to attend, they pay their deposit, then they would fill out our recognition of prior learning, or RPL, which is our credit transfer evaluation process. So that's where we're looking at the syllabi, seeing the relevancy between that credit and their program and maybe courses in their program. For UCD, and this would probably be similar for many schools, we do what's called a module list. A module just means class. A class list on their course website. So if they're, for example, wanting to study biology, they can go to the biology course page, see the module list, and see every single required and optional class that they have in that program with a description and exactly how they'll be assessed. So if, let's say they're going into their next year, their second year of their associates, and they are thinking of transferring to UCD, then they can even look at that list ahead of time of a major that they might be interested in and kind of try to match up those classes a bit with that specific major. This is going to vary course to course, so just going up to program structure there. For example, we have an undecided pathway called Liberal Arts and Sciences. If students are transferring into our Liberal Arts and Sciences pathway, it is always 4 years. Just because of the way it's set up, there are gen eds within that they're taking in specific topics. So if they are going into Liberal Arts and Sciences, it is a 4-year program. Typically, most of the time when we work with transfers, though, they already have that idea from that year or two that they've done at a local community college or college or university in the US to get an idea of what they want to study exactly. So I'd say that's not typically the case. Under that, you can see 3-year programs. We do have some 3-year programs as well. Majority are going to be still 4 years, but some of those 3-year programs, for example, like psychology, allows them to at least know that even if they can't shave off a full year, they're only going to have 3 years for that program. And it might shave off some room for more electives within their course load if they would like. And then for clinical programs, for example, medicine is about a 6-year program for us. And veterinary medicine is about a 5-year program. So they would be shaving off some time from like a US standpoint of thinking of like a 4-year pre-med degree onto a 4-year medical degree, which would be 8 years total. So even if they do like 1 year again in college, kind of figuring out what they want to do, or those 2 years, and then they say, I really want to do medicine, then it would still make sense for them to come in knowing that those credits might not take off a full year out of medicine or veterinary medicine program, but they would still be ending around the same time. I would say if a student's at 3 years, has 3 years completed of a program, that's where I would recommend that they complete their bachelor's degree, at least for UCD, and then apply to our graduate entry program, because then the graduate entry, at least for medicine, would be 4 years. Just because, again, knowing that those 3 years most likely wouldn't transfer over to only having a year left at UCD. Financial considerations, pretty similar. Again, thinking about the timeline, I would recommend students or counselors reach out to us to talk about what that timeline might look like, especially, again, course dependent. Our transfer students are eligible for the exact same scholarships that our first year incoming students from high school are eligible for. So even if they come in and credits do transfer over to take a full year off, they can still apply to Global Excellence Scholarship, which is our 50 to 100%. They would have to know early in the year because that application is due at the end of January. But our International Student Scholarships is all year round. They don't have to do anything additional for that. That's just automatic. Visa process, I already mentioned, it's on the back end. We do have a list on our website of everything they need for Irish border control. Tends to be that they have health insurance that covers them, that they have financial enough proof of funds to show that they can sustain themselves while they are there, proof that they paid their deposit and they are coming to UCD. So it tends to be pretty easy stuff to collect. And then the Irish residency permit immigration appointment is after they arrive. So they would schedule that even after arrival within the first 3 months. And that allows them to enter or to leave and re-enter the country to work part-time as well with us if they would like to, up to 20 hours a week.
Wonderful. About Greece. Now, some of this information is going to be country specific, right? The visa process, but then other of it is going to be school specific as the American College of Greece. So for program structure, it's a 4-year degree. Now, of course, transfer students, if they're coming from a US institution and coming to study with us, they will be able to transfer credits. It goes from course matching, right? So it could be Bio 101, at a US institution. For us, it might be under a different course code, but what we typically want to see is their course description and even the syllabus in some cases to make sure it really matches up well. That is a process that happens after a student has already been admitted, and then we can give them an evaluation, and then they can decide whether it's a good fit for them and their academic goal. Examinations, as mentioned a little bit earlier, typically a midterm and a final. There aren't really assessments throughout the entire term. Only a few classes are like that. Many majors have a thesis or a final project. There's nothing that it's just do the whole checklist of your degree, and then you graduate. There's usually some sort of project that brings everything together. Financial considerations, ACG is FAFSA eligible, GI Bill and veterans benefits. We also accept 529 plans. We offer merit scholarships to students. That is just based off of their entering GPA. For students that are coming in as transfers, if they have more than 15 credits, it'll be based off of their college transcript. If they're under 15 credits at the college level, it'll be based off of their high school transcripts. Now, visa process. So the visa happens pre-arrival. There is, like mentioned, there's some costs that go with that. There's a huge checklist that they go through, but the consulates are usually familiar with their students. The biggest consideration is the financial burden of showing that they have the ability to support themselves abroad. And I would think that's for any of the countries that AIRR-NA is part of. For all of the visas, there's going to be some financial burden. And I think that's what students and families typically forget when they're going abroad. And so they need to be able to show access to that. And it typically has to be cash access. So like in a debit account, it can't be just saying we have access to credit. Even though that can work to support your application, it's never just enough. And then in Greece specifically, so this is not only ACG, but as a country, students cannot work or take internships in Greece as non-EU citizens. If you have a student that's an EU citizen that simply was studying in the US, they can work in Greece. There's just some additional paperwork they have to file, but it is their right. Now, ACG specific requirements, we are at 2.75 college or high school GPA. In high school, it has to be an unweighted GPA. And then if students are below, we will use the high school GPA to do the admissions. And that's a little bit about Greece. And so these are the common transfer questions, things that families need to know and students need to know, and they don't really always know how to navigate it. A lot of these are relevant to students transferring between US institutions. So like how are credits evaluated? A lot of times it's course by course, if that's what the school's eligible to do. Students should submit their academic transcript at application and be prepared to provide more detailed course information. Some institutions have frameworks already built. If there's a partnership with the school, those 2+2 programs mentioned earlier, but not all institutions offer that. What if I haven't finished my associate's degree? So this is a little bit of a particular one because in some cases, it's perfectly fine. You're just going into your bachelor's, that's okay. For others, you want to see that full completed degree to be considered for admissions to a specific program. That varies from institution to institution, but it's really good for students and families to have that answer before they apply. Do I need to have my degree? Should I even be worrying about that at that point? In some cases, it's in their benefit to not finish their degree. And that's something that I've worked with my transfer students is maybe it's better for you to enter ACG right now because you don't have to worry about matching any additional courses. Can I work while studying? Many countries you can work while you're studying. Greece, you cannot, but that's something that all students and families should be checking with the school specifically. The school will have that information. Unfortunately, there have been times where families have assumed that the student can work on campus, maybe not off campus, but on campus, and that isn't the case. So always double check the institution. And then what documents are needed? Again, very institution specific, but it's the general admissions things. The application that you submit to the institution, the transcripts, the course syllabi, a letter of recommendation if that's a requirement. English proficiency is something that it depends. Sometimes it's a visa requirement, but it's not an institution requirement. That's something that I've also seen, at least in Greece. So that's about the common questions. And of course, you're welcome to add any other questions and we'll be answering them more towards the end. Thank you.
Great. Just common challenges to address. So firstly, and this was already mentioned, understanding the grading scale. This is a very UK-centric problem. We have very weird names, first, 2-1, 2-2. We use different things. Just making sure students understand it so it doesn't give them a scare. Particularly when it comes to credit gaps, making sure you kind of collect as much documentation ahead of time. Many universities will reach out to you and say, hey, we would like to see the syllabus for this course, or we would like to see your transcript for that. But if you could kind of preempt it, it will make your life easier. Dealing with anything around visas, there is going to be some bureaucratic issues. Actually, I can see one of the questions I'll answer now around US passports have a 5 to 10 year renewal cycle. Essentially, this is going to be a country-based situation. Each one of our universities will have someone who works within the visa team. in the UK, and this might be the thing, as I do not work in the visa team, so I legally cannot give specific advice to a student. I can normally answer general information. Most universities will have someone either with that qualification or their country will allow them to answer the questions. They are always going to be your best subject. I always say it's for students, it's your first visa. For our university, you're probably our 3,000th that year. We deal with it all the time. The big one is the emotional transition, and I always talk about this in terms of support. You are not going on holiday when you go to study abroad. You are going to live abroad, and there will be the highs of, getting to go see, whether like all the tourist stuff, and there'll be the lows of like doing a day of laundry. And so having students kind of be prepared for that and have discussions before about what they'll do in the highs and lows can be really useful. Like I said before, I've actually moved abroad 4 times. And so I have gone through all of these highs and lows. And that was a big learning lesson for me, realizing I wasn't going to be on holiday the whole time, that I was just going to be living a life.
I can relate to that as well. And especially like from a school context, like thinking about like, I would say that first month, even for our students who are coming in first year and not transfer, it is a lot to adjust to, and setting up your phone and your new bank account and like all those things. I always tell students like, it does feel like you're just like step by step getting through everything that first month, but really after that, then you start to settle in and everything. So this timeline, we've kind of hit a lot of these points already, but just to kind of gather it in a concluding thought of when to start thinking about these things, when students really should start researching or starting on their housing, their visa. And again, some of these things are going to be school and country specific on when they start them. Again, like for the Republic of Ireland, because some of that visa stuff is on the back end, we have transfer students right now who are looking to start this autumn. So that's something that, again, like the earlier the better, but we of course understand that the feeling of wanting to transfer could come at any time and might be a little bit of a later process. So just some things to consider. This would be an ideal timeline. Even if you have a high school senior who didn't realize international schools was an option for them and really wanted to do it and applied maybe later in the cycle and they don't feel comfortable moving over quite yet, they might want to take like a gap year instead. If they decide to take community college classes, online classes during that time, they technically wouldn't be a deferral, they'd be a transfer for the next year. So just some things to think about for that timeline. Could still be that 12 to 8 months that they start thinking about it. Yeah.
In the interest of time, we'll quickly go through, but you can read these things a bit later. If there's any questions that you want to put in, we've got about 1 minute left where we can take questions. My number one advice for everyone is to go to the AIRR-NA website. It's a fantastic resource. Transferring is going to be very personalized. So even if you're looking on the website and looking for what their entry requirements are, it's really encouraged for the students to reach out. AIRR-NA lists all of our details of all these international universities that you can reach out to. Traditionally, with transfers, we will be looking to assess it case by case. There may be examples of partnerships. But yeah, those would be my really top tips, as well as we have a number of events coming up that you can speak specifically and in person to our academics too. Or to my AIRR-NA colleagues. All right, great. Thank you so much.
That is possible. Transferring is possible. Have a good day.
Bye, everyone.